in the process.
Let's see. We'll talk about it all next week when the Eagles report to training camp. Let's go to our friend now, BLG, Brandon Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation, joining us now on Birds 365, back from Vermont. BLG, how you doing, man? How was your vacation?
It was good. Doing well. Excited for Eagles training camp practice that will be at in 1 week.
Yeah, Vermont's one of the few states I haven't been to, BLG. Unfortunately, there's, I've done so much traveling over the years for sports. Obviously, they don't have a sports team, so I'm not going for that reason. I haven't checked out the fall foliage yet, but I only hear good things. So I hope you had a good time. It's good to see you back. Hopefully you're well rested and charged up. We were talking a lot about Hard Knocks. It's a thing. I don't know if you've been watching. HBO kind of okey doked everybody with this teaser that I said, calm down, because I talked to a bunch of Giants people, and now we have the full understanding of what went down with Saquon Barkley. Boy, I don't know about you, but what I get from that show is Eagles fans should be thrilled to have an owner like Jeffrey Lurie and not an owner like John Mara, who, best I can tell, is just a really rich fan, BLG.
And a co-owner at that too, right? With Tish there, which is kind of like maybe not the best dynamic in terms of, I think part of the Giants' problem over the past, I don't know, decade or so is that they're not always pulling in the same direction at that level with like conflicting interests at the top there. The Saquon thing has like obviously dominated this series.
Yeah.
Which is kind of just like, if you're the Giants organization, like they can't be thrilled about this, right? This is such a weird kind of look inside their building.
I think that's the other part, BLG. I think no team is going to want to do this show.
Yeah.
Especially, can you imagine Eagles fans hearing honest conversations about Hassan Reddick this offseason or Jalen Hurts and previously? I mean, it would not go over well.
No, not at all. And I can't see Howie Roseman wanting that, Jeffrey Lurie wanting that. So yeah, I wonder if this is a one and done kind of thing after the Giants' appearance on here.
Yeah, definitely going to pull back. I mean, Giants lose one guy, and it's the whole series is about the guy they lost rather than everything else they're trying to do. You're right, BLG. It's kind of a kick in the face that everybody's continuing to talk about the one thing they're probably trying to move on from, which is funny. But, BLG, we talked. We opened the show today. We did a lot of talk about the linebacker. John's doing his previews over on SI.com for each position group. Boy, the linebacker is an ugly thing to preview, BLG. There's not a lot of talent in the room. Can they overcome the talent at linebacker position this year with Vic Fangio? How good can this defense be despite the lack of talent at linebacker?
Yeah, this is like a yearly storyline for the Eagles, right?
Yeah, it is.
Can they get by? I like Devin White from what we saw out of him early in training camp. Now, obviously, coming off of a bad year. He was benched, basically. He wasn't even playing too much in that Lions playoff game at the end of the season. So hardly considering him a sure thing. But, when you look at his pedigree, when you look at what he did in spring practices, which is a small sample, and if he can build on that in training camp, it's obviously a much more encouraging sign. But, I'm intrigued by Devin White, want to see what he has in this system. Should be healthier, I guess, than he was a year ago when he kind of had that injury kind of hampering him all season long, assuming he can stay healthy. So not to say he's the savior of the position, he magically fixes everything, but I think there's something there. And then after that, I don't know. I don't know if Zach Bond can truly, be a good starter. I don't know if Nakobe Dean can factor in after Devin White. I just don't know.
I'm going to swing for the fences here, BLG at linebacker, and that's Ben Van Sumer. And hear me out. People talk about the athleticism of Devin White, which is true. Phenomenal athlete, certainly the best from an athletic standpoint, the best linebacker the Eagles have had in a very long time. Hasn't translated on the field in Tampa Bay over a very large sample size with a very good defensive mind leading him in Todd Bowles. And one of the things that soured me even more, BLG, was how Devin talked about Todd Bowles. He loves him. He called him a father figure. He still checks in. Todd Bowles checks in to make sure he's okay. So I'm like, this is like the perfect ecosystem for Devin White in Tampa Bay, and it didn't work. So in a weird way, that kind of soured me. Ben Van Sumeren has similar traits. If you just look at the athleticism, he didn't play in college, basically. He's unbelievable from an athlete. The 4.4 guy, his explosion numbers, his vertical leap is like 42 and a half. His broad jump is 11 feet. He's outrageous. And he doesn't have any bad habits that you have to fix. This is where Vic's got to show up. Make this guy a player, Vic Fangio. Ben Van Sumeren.
Okay. I like Ben Van Sumeren.
Okay.
I thought he showed some things late last year.
I like that reaction. Okay.
Yeah, me too.
I like Ben Van Sumeren. I mean, that's the thing. Like when it comes to linebacker, I think you're hitting on it, John. Like you're rooting for the long shots there, in terms of like if that position is going to be solidified. I like a Brandon Smith. I thought, he's like their biggest linebacker, just frame wise. And he was running with the second team a little bit there with Nakobe Dean in the spring practices. So kind of interested to see if he can do anything. But when you're banking on these kind of guys, the guy that a lot of fans probably don't even know is on the team.
Yeah, that's what we got a
tough.
comment that who the hell is Ben Van Sumeren?
Yeah.
And I get it. And it's very unlikely, but I'm just looking for optimistic paths. And I think he's one. And I think, Nakobe's the biggest one. I still think Nakobe's the biggest one. If he can stay healthy, he's got good instincts. He's not the best athlete in the world for an NFL player, but I think he can play the position if he ever stays healthy. I think it's a bad sign if Nakobe Dean is not the Eagles' best linebacker in 2024. You seem to be leaning towards more Devin. And I think ultimately, Brandon, they want those two guys to be the starters. Who's got the green dot if those two guys are the starters?
I mean, I think it would be Nakobe based on the past, but I think again, a relatively perfect world, obviously in a perfect world, then Devin White and Nakobe Dean are both all pros, but in a relatively realistic kind of projection here, I think Nakobe Dean is a guy who can kind of be more of a stabilizing force for them and solid. And Devin White is the guy who he's probably going to give up some plays. He might make some big plays too, as in coverage, blitzing, but he also might give up some. I think that's kind of that dynamic there. They have one guy who's more of like the solid and steady, and the other guy who's more of the variance guy. I think that's kind of how they're looking at it.
Yeah, that's a good take. I mean, I think Nakobe has more of that instinctual linebacker feel, so I definitely agree with you there. BLG, let me zoom out and ask you to zoom in. We're 6 days out from them reporting, 7 days out, as you discussed, until they're on the practice field. Where's your head as we approach training camp? Like, what's the top thing you're looking at when you get down there at the NovaCare? What's on BLG's mind for the Eagles in 2024 as you approach training camp?
Yeah, just keep it simple and look at the quarterback, right? I mean, especially coming off.
Can't go wrong there.
The spring, and also the last time we heard him talk. I mean, I'm sure that's going to come up. His comments about Nick Sirianni. I'm sure that'll be addressed not only by Nick Sirianni himself, but also Jalen Hurts after practice. So a lot to monitor off the field as well as on the field. Does Jalen Hurts look more comfortable than he did in the spring practices last year? Going into training camp, especially coming off of the entering 2022, I thought, obviously there was a lot of eyes on Jalen Hurts and a lot of pressure. And is he the guy? Every day in training camp, monitoring super closely. Last year, it was to me, it felt like, okay, he proved it. Played awesome all year. It's great in the Super Bowl. Don't really need to wonder if he's the guy. Monitor him as closely. This year, it's back to you need to watch really closely and watch. I want to see every single pass and see how he's adjusting to this offense.
I often bring up, really, if you boil it down, the Eagles offense from 2023 and 2022 is pretty similar if you take out the turnovers. But from that there's such a variance with that, and other people are involved. It could be a tip ball, it could be a failed mesh point thing. So that's not all on Jalen Hurts, but he's obviously got to be more ball security conscious, and I think he will be. But my biggest concern, and you brought this up on the show before, BLG, so I'll give you credit, is how long it took him to get rid of the football last year, which is he was in Justin Fields levels. And I remember being in that Eagles game in Chicago where Jalen got hurt. But I remember looking at Justin Fields going, you need a sundial to measure this guy getting rid of the football. Just couldn't make a decision. Jalen's got to get better at that. But I think it's got to be organic. I don't think it could be, Doug Nussmeier mentioned 2.3 seconds. He's never going to be at 2.3 seconds. But it can't be get rid of the football, dump it off. It's got to be organic. That's a difficult tightrope for Kellen Moore, don't you think?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's not about being at 2.3 where, I think Tua, you're talking about Tua Tagovailoa at that point at the top of the league. And he's going to hold it longer than a lot of quarterbacks just because of his mobility. Some of that is baked in. He doesn't need to be the fastest, but I always point out, in 2022, he was at 2.8 seconds instead of the 3.3 or whatever he was last year. That half of a second is an eternity in the NFL. If you can kind of get him closer, maybe to 3 even, I think that's kind of something you would like to see overall. And I think part of it's, the intermediate game. I don't think we've seen enough consistency there. We know Jalen Hurts can air it out deep. I don't think that there's a question there. And I think at times, he can really get it out fast if that's the intention of the play. But I think kind of working the intermediate game, that's something especially I don't think we really saw in spring practices. I mean, he had a lot of completions of 8 yards, 5 to under 10 yards. I like to see him work the middle of the field, which has been a weakness for him over his career. And I like to see him work that intermediate game. Yeah,
he doesn't seem comfortable throwing it in the middle of the field, because I was kind of shocked because Aaron Schatz and Mike Tanier's, the old Football Outsiders guys, I forget what it's called now, but they do a great job, and a bunch of interesting nuggets. And one was the Eagles were last in the NFL throwing the football over the middle of the field. That kind of checks.
Mm-hmm.
But they were really effective when they did it. They were fourth in the league. And I think he's just really uncomfortable doing it. And I bring that up because there was a lot of that, and sometimes it was ugly in the spring. But I think that's good coaching. If Kellen Moore's trying to force him to do something, as long as you're not getting to week one and saying, all right, you got to throw it over the middle of the field. Hopefully he evolves naturally. I think that's how you have to approach it.
I mean, we saw progress in that area, from 2021 to 2022 when they got A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown was supposed to be the answer to that. Okay, it kind of unlocked the middle of the field for Jalen Hurts that year. And then obviously we saw regression in that regard. And it is funny, that they're so effective at it. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, once you get the ball in A.J. Brown's hands over the middle of the field, hey, he can make more yardage happen himself. And it doesn't have to all be on the quarterback at that point. So, yeah, it would be good to see them kind of improve that area.
What's your expectation for the changes Kellen Moore is going to bring to this offense, BLG? Not that different of an offense than it was last year, right? I mean, you're bringing back most of the same guys. You added Saquon Barkley, but everything else is the same, and you lose Jason Kelce, obviously, which is a big one there. But, what kind of changes does Kellen Moore bring? I think it's good for the intermediate game. I think he's a guy that likes to spread the ball around. How do you see Kellen Moore fitting in this offense?
I mean, it depends who you ask. Jalen say it's 95% new, so a lot more different according to him. I mean, that's the big question, right? How is it going to look? How different is it going to be? How much, do they retain from what they have been doing in the past? As Nick Sirianni said, they don't want to scrap everything they've been doing entirely. I think we're going to see twist. Obviously, we're going to see more motion than probably none at all. But, I think a big thing on my mind entering training camp and about the team as a whole is just how much of some of the things that we've seen over the past couple of years. How much of that is truly Nick Sirianni, Ryan Johnson, Shane Steichen? How much of that is their interpretation of what Jalen Hurts likes to do, and making him feel comfortable? So and that'll be a really interesting test case this year if there are certain things that are still not present, such as maybe throws over the middle or running back targets. Well, then it's clear to me at that point that it's not just a coordinator kind of thing, it's also a quarterback kind of thing. So I think that's really going to be interesting to see.
How much pressure do you think Kellen Moore has? Because boy, I look at the numbers last year and they weren't acceptable, and they weren't acceptable understandably during the collapse. But I think if you go back in the moment, even at the bye week or when they were 10-1, like everybody was complaining, BLG. The style points weren't there. And everybody's like, oh, this what's wrong with this offense? And meanwhile, they're number 3 in third down offense, number 1 in fourth down, top 10 in red zone, good in situational football, but it didn't look good. It wasn't aesthetic. He's not only got to be effective, there's got to be a beauty to it. How much pressure is on Kellen Moore?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, ire and criticism came from the talent was good. It was really, really good. And I think it was hard to argue that the coaching staff was getting the most or even more out of the talent that they had, which is, I think, kind of an oversimplified way to look at good coaching, getting more out of the talent that you have. So I think the pressure is extremely high on Kellen Moore because, by contrast, like with Vic Fangio, the way I'll put it, I don't think the Eagles are hiring Vic Fangio because they're saying we need to have the best or like a top 5 defense in the NFL. I don't think that's the realistic expectation. If that happens, obviously they're going to take it. I'm not saying they're not shooting for that, but I think more realistically, they will settle for, okay, competency, not totally falling apart like they did at the end of last year. Whereas the bar for the offense and how Jeffrey Lurie feels about that side of the ball too, ultimately, at the end of the day, that bar is really high. And they need to be an elite level offense. They need to be dominant. So I think there's a ton of pressure on Kellen Moore to not only get the results, but also, navigate this situation that he's in where the quarterback, clearly, there's an adjustment there. And he certainly seems to feel a certain way about a new offense. And then just the dynamic with a head coach who previously liked to have a lot of offensive control and now doesn't have that anymore. So not only is he tasked with getting these high level results, but he also kind of has to navigate like the politics of it as well.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing. I mean, and he has pressure, as you just pointed out, BLG, in Philly, but he also has pressure personally. Like he has everything he needs coming here to take over this offense. If he fails with this offense, it's not going to be a great sign for him. 3 teams in 3 years, and you couldn't get this offense going. So from a personal perspective, Kellen definitely has some pressure there as well. BLG, one thing I want to bring up, because, I asked you what you're thinking about coming into the season, and you said Jalen Hurts, and I'm right there with you. I mean, we go as far as he takes us. But I have a new fear about Jalen Hurts that I've been thinking about the last couple of days. Is his shelf life shorter than we had anticipated when we signed him? And what I mean by that is, me and John constantly talk about, we don't want to change Jalen Hurts. We don't want to turn him into Brock Purdy. We want to use him, for what he has. Are we ever going to see the guy we saw in 2022 again, that explosive, dynamic playmaker that could use his legs, use his arm? And that's what I mean when I say is the shelf life shorter than we anticipated. Any thoughts on that, just on where we are with him and how long, he's going to be able to play like he plays?
I can't say we'll never see that guy again because he's only 25, going to be going on 26 here in like early August or so. Yeah. So, still pretty young, relatively young into his NFL career, at least the way quarterbacks are playing, late into their careers these days. So, you look at the kind of year that Dak Prescott had last year's first kind of like, MVP caliber kind of season that didn't happen for him until a little bit later in his career, at least relative to Jalen Hurts. So, I still think there's room to improve, room to rebound, but I think 2022 was so special in so many ways, not only him, but also the, supporting cast and the health and all those kind of factors going on, that it's just going to be kind of hard to recreate that exactly. So, I think that, this was also talked about in those ESPN Jeremy Fowler rankings that came out this week. A lot of NFL insiders believe, a healthier Jalen Hurts this year will make a difference. And I believe in that too. But of course, he needs to stay healthy. And that's a big question
And that's
mark.
part of my worry. It's the physical stuff. This is
And
the NFL. This isn't college, man. Like, he's getting beat
Yeah.
around. That's where I'm like, look, I don't know if he's going to ever be able to play like he did, with staying healthy.
And then it's a concern if he is able to play, but not at 100%, and then he's not that full force player, and that limits his game, and then you're kind of a compromised quarterback at that point.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about Vic. We talked about Kellen. In a lot of ways, and we talked about it with the linebackers. In a lot of ways, I get the feeling it's like, all right, we got this supercharged offense. We bring in Saquon Barkley to make it even better. Still got a top 5 offensive line, playmakers all over the place. Jalen Hurts is healthier. Everything's set up on offense. And defense, it's like, yeah, Vic will figure it out. And I think it might be leaning towards too much. Vic will figure it out. Is that the feeling you get with this defense, or do you see a higher upside? Who was that guest we had, Xander, who just went down the litany of questions about this? There's
Bill
questions
Colarulo
all over the place.
Yeah, Bill Colarulo.
Yeah, it was Bill.
Last week, though, John. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Bryce Huff. I'm tremendously high on Bryce Huff. I think Bryce Huff is going to be, but it's all projection. It's all projection. Josh Sweat, is he going to bounce back?
Mm-hmm.
Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, conditioning. All the young corners, the linebackers, even the safeties. CJ barely played last year.
Yeah.
Reed Blankenship might be the most concrete player on this team. You know what he's going to be. Is it too much? Vic will figure it out.
I think when you look at his track record, I think you feel better than you do worse about it. But again, I think it's not the expectation that Vic Fangio's coming in here and making it an elite defense. Like, that's a sure thing. And I think that one would be remiss to have that be the expectation. I think, again, the expectation, and now this is too low of a bar, but it should be like, it's not going to be pathetic of a joke as it was when Matt Patricia took it over in the middle of last season. I think that's kind of, realistically, again, what they're trying to hope to avoid, that there might be rough patches, but I think they're also hoping that they can do enough with the talent that they have to make it work and not be, this liability, the downfall of the team entirely. It might not be the strength of the team. I think they're kind of going into the season like eyes wide open about that. There are situations where things click. The defense is maybe a lot better than anyone could reasonably expect it to be. Sure, but again, I think they're kind of just trying to raise the floor of that unit and prevent it from being a total disaster that sinks the offense.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, there are a lot of questions on the defense, and I asked this question yesterday. I'll ask you, BLG. September 6th is here, or is it the 5th? September 6th is here. Who's the starting corner opposite Darius Slay on week 1?
Yeah, I'm going with Isaiah Rodgers. I'm leaning into it. The way he moved when I saw him in spring practices was really impressive to me. I look at how this coaching staff as a whole, and obviously Vic Fangio's a new factor, but I think there could be some bias towards the veteran player. We saw that in terms of who was getting the first team reps at corner. It was originally Isaiah Rodgers and those spring drills. It's going to be a fierce competition. I fully acknowledge that. I don't think it's going to be like Isaiah Rodgers by far and away. It could be by a very slim margin. But I look at his experience. I look at his movement ability, his ball skills and everything. And I think that's just a player that you want on the field out there.
I'm going with Quinyon from the perspective of, A, that's where they want to go. Ultimately that's the end game. B, I look at Kansas City a couple years ago, and when they played all those young defensive backs, it was kind of ugly early for them, BLG. People forget. And then as they got down the stretch, they got over those Jim Schwartz coin startup costs, and all of a sudden, hey, they got some good young defensive backs. I think Vic's going to throw Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and say, let's go, man. Let's get them over with. And it might be ugly at times, but I think that's the way they should go, and I think it's the way they're going to go, unless they have terrible summers, which I don't expect, because they both look good. All the young corners look good. Kaylee looked good. But Rogers was the best player of the spring, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But they want to get the Quignon. He's got the higher ceiling. Why not get those startup costs over?
I would agree in terms of like what they should do. And I think that's clearly been a detriment of this coaching staff, and to the point where Howie Roseman acknowledged basically as much they need the young guys to play. Of course, not too long after Howie Roseman said at the combine, Nick Sirianni talked about needing to win each week and kind of directly contradicted what Howie had to say. So, I have to see it totally before I believe it when it comes to playing the young players. But I think no matter who starts at cornerback too, I think let's say it is Rogers for the sake of this discussion. I think Quignon's still going to be on the field. We saw that in the spring where there was certain packages where
playing dime linebacker.
Exactly.
I always joke about that. If Sean decided that, we'd be burning down the city, and Vic does it, and it's like, all right, let's roll.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing the difference in the cachet between the two. But yeah, the standpoint of his ability to do things like that, I think it's a luxury that is real. And I think it's going to help the Eagles. The embargo session we had with Nick Sirianni was lifted, and you saw about 1 million stories. What's the biggest story with Nick Sirianni and this ship to you, PLG?
I think it's, the continued discourse on his role with the team, what was his responsibility. I thought the word selflessness was interesting to come up there.
Yeah, that was mine. That was my question, PLG.
Yeah. Well, good question. And I mean, selflessness is a very generous portrayal.
Yeah, it is. Like, look at me, I'm selfless.
It just, he wanted to do it, right? Nick Sirianni was the one who came to Jeffrey Lurie after this past season, was like, you know what? I think I should give up some of the offensive control just for the good of the team. That was kind of interesting framing to me. But yeah, I think, but honestly, to give Nick credit here too, kind of ripping on him a little bit there. I think he's eyes wide open about the situation. He knows. He admitted it. He said, if we're not winning games, I could be gone. So I think he realizes the pressure, and if how he responds to that is obviously going to be what determines his future here.
Yeah, I was kind of impressed by it because, to be honest, look, if he walks in after that collapse and Doug Peterson's things, he's out. So I think there were two options for him: either own it or be forced to do it. And he decided to own it, which I think is a smart way to go about it. I think it's the politically savvy way, is how I described it, to go about it. Make the best of a bad situation, which I give him credit. I think he did. I think he took the right path. Do you think there was another path, or that was it?
I think having that Doug situation, I'm sure he wasn't here for that directly, but I'm sure that
he learned something from it.
Yeah. I'm sure he's aware of that because, at least I'm sure that's been brought to his attention, and to have that, experience to kind of contrast to his, I think that was extremely valuable for him in the situation that he was in. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really think there was a great other way for him to go about it than the way that it's played out.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it might insulate him. I mean, he's now given up, because even before when Shane was calling plays and Brian Johnson, remember, he had the quote, "It doesn't matter if it's Howie Roseman or Jeffrey Lurie, it's my offense." Now it's not his offense. So if we come out of the gate and we're sputtering or we're struggling to get it going a little bit, he almost insulated himself in terms of, you kept Nick for the year. Now you're going to have to see it through for the whole year. Now, if they stink at the end of the year, he's going to be gone. But my point is, if we come out slow, I don't know if you're going to be able to really blame Nick Sirianni like you would have,
they can blame him. They'll blame him. They'll blame him.
They'll blame Kellen more too.
Well, I don't know, because Nick is the one. I think Kellen will get the benefit of the doubts, at least early, but versus Nick. I mean, people are going to be upset if the
Well, I mean,
offense
if they're going to
crap.
move on from Nick, 'cause if they start slow, I mean, shit, you should have just fired him then last year. Why not? You know what I mean? You got now that
Yeah,
you created the bed, now you got to lay in it.
I've been very honest about that. I think Jeffrey straddled the fence. I think, you make a decision. You either fire the guy or you give him a mulligan, and it's your team. You do what you want. I don't like the straddling of the fence, but we'll see how it works out. At Brandon Gowton, make sure you follow BLG on X, Twitter, Bleeding Green Nation. Tremendous sites. You should go there every morning to get your latest Eagles news. Brandon does a tremendous job keeping everything up to date. And I hope you had a good vacation, buddy. I hope you're rested and ready to go, because we got more practice time, supposedly.
That's right.
Maybe we'll get a schedule even someday.
We'll see. That might be pushing it.
Yeah, that's too lofty there, Johnny Mac. All right, BLG, thanks for joining the show, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, bud.
BLG joining us on Birds 365. Good stuff from BLG. As always, sights set on the quarterback, Johnny Mac. I like it because BLG brings us back to reality. The quarterback is the main position here in the NFL, and it matters what our quarterback does this year. Let's take one more time out, Johnny Mac. We missed that one in the middle, and then we will wrap up this Wednesday edition. Moving right along, man. We are almost down to 5 days now after Birds 365 ends. That's how I view my days almost. When Birds is over, it's like on to the next day. I know it's early, but 6 days until they report to camp, so it's right around the corner. Let's take a commercial timeout. We'll come back and close out this Wednesday edition of Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.